Hi, welcome to the Gemara on Gimel Amud Bet. We're starting from the word gufa, 15 lines up from the bottom. And this is going to be a split video. I'm making the entire video now, but you only have to watch the first piece. I'll tell you when to stop. There are a few questions to answer, and then we'll continue with the rest the next time you have homework. So the Gemara begins with the word gufa, which is one of your vocabulary words, and it means that we're returning to an earlier quoted source, but literally it means the thing itself. So gufa, and I already put a colon in there. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, "Krach v'kol samuchla v'kol hanirei mo nidon kekrach." A city and everything that's adjacent to it, and everything that may be seen from it, is judged as if it is part of that city. So your first question, question number one, where have we seen this before? Why were we discussing it, and why do you think we're still discussing it? Tana. We also have a Tanaitic statement that says, "Samuch afal pi she'eino nireh, nireh afal pi she'eino samuch." Adding on to or interpreting the statement of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, samuch, something which is adjacent, even though you can't see it from that city, something which can be seen from it, even though it is not adjacent. In other words, it only has to be nireh or samuch, it doesn't have to be both. Bishlama nireh, it makes sense to say something that can be seen from it, afal pi she'eino samuch, even though it's not actually adjacent. Mishkachala. That case, we find that case. I'll put in a comma. Can go ziyafa barosh har, like when you're dwelling at the top of a mountain. In other words, it's easy to find a case where something can be seen from the city even though it's not adjacent. If the city is at the top of a mountain, then you can see lots of places and they might not be actually adjacent. Ela samuch afal pi she'eino nireh hechi mishkachala. However, something which is adjacent but cannot be seen from the city, hechi mishkachala, how do you find that case? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, so here's the answer. Sheyoshevet b'nachal. When you're dwelling in a nachal, in a river, basically in a low place. If your city is very low down, then there might be places which are actually adjacent, but they're higher up and they can't be seen from that location. The Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Krach sheyashav ulevasof hukaf nidon kekfar. A city which was settled, people dwelled there, and then afterwards it was encircled with a wall, is judged as a village, is judged as a non-walled city. My tama, why should this be the case? Dichtiv, as it says, as it is written in Vayikra Chafei Chavtet, the Ishkim Kor Beit Moshav Ir Choma. A man who sells a house of dwelling in an Ir Choma, in a walled city. I'm going to put this in yellow because it's a pasuk. But before we go on, I want to look at this pasuk inside, just the way I told you you should look up psukim. You're going to need the context here in order to understand what's going on. So we're in Vayikra. We'll start from this pasuk. V'ishkim kor beit moshav ir choma, v'hayta ge'ulato ad tom shnat mimkaro, yamim tieh ge'ulato. A man who sells a house of dwelling in a walled city, and he has a year to redeem the house if he wants to do so, meaning he has a year to sort of take it back if he wants it. That's how much time he has. V'im lo yigael ad mlot lo shana tzmima, v'kama bayit asher ba'ir asher lo choma l'tzmitut, l'koneh oto l'dorotav lo yotze b'yovel. If he doesn't redeem it within a year, through in that full year, then that house in the walled city, in the city that has a wall, is sold forever to the person who bought it and does not return to the original owner in the Yovel year. Notice here that there's a kriyu k'tiv. Lo is written in a strange way in Tanakh, Lamed Vav Aleph. So you pronounce it lo, but it's spelled lo. It's got both of those, almost like a double entendre. It's got both of those going on. You'll need to come back to this later. And your second question is twofold. First of all, just write down the psukim where this is. Some of your Gemaras only have the parak. Write down the psukim also. And look at the parak as a whole and figure out the context, more or less what's going on in this parak. Why are we talking about this? But for the purposes of our Gemara, we're talking about things that happen in walled cities, selling properties in walled cities. And the implication here is that the walled cities may be the same type of walled cities as we've been discussing up till now, cities that have been walled from the time of Yehoshua ben Nun. So in that case, it says, Ishkim kor beit moshav ir choma, And the implication of that pasuk, according to the Gemara, is shehukaf ulavasof yashav, v'lo sheyashav ulavasof hukaf. A walled city means something that was walled and then settled, and not something that was settled and then walled. A city that was settled and then walled does not count as a walled city. The Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and again Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, Krach she'in bo asara batlanin nidon kikfar. A city that does not have 10 batlanin, 10 idle people, 10 people doing nothing in it, is judged as a kfar, is considered a village. My kamashmalan, what is this teaching us? Tanina, we already know this from a Mishnah, we already learned, Ezo here, well, except we didn't already learn it, but we will. But we already know from a Mishnah, those of us who know all of Mishnah, Ezo hi gdola, what is considered a big city? Kol sheyesh ba asara batlanin. Pachot mikan harei kfar. So what is considered a large city? Any place that has 10 idle people in it. Pachot mikan harei kfar, less than this, is considered a village. But the Gemara explains why Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi nonetheless needed to tell us this, even though it's in a city. So this is the answer to the question. Krach itzterichle. A city, we had to be told about a krach specifically, a big city. Afal gav demiklele ma'alma. Even though people come to it, people travel to it from the rest of the world. In other words, a very big city, a krach, people come in and out all the time. So for sure, at any given time, there are 10 batlanin there, 10 idle people. But no, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is telling us a krach needs to have people who live there, actual krach dwellers. It needs to have enough to have 10 batlanin. The Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and a further statement of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Krach shecharav v'levasof yashav nidon krach. A city that was destroyed and then was rebuilt, was at the end settled again, nidon krach, is judged as a city. My charav, what does it mean that it was destroyed? Ilema charvu chomotav, if you want to say that means that its walls were destroyed, Yashav in lo yashav lo, then are we really saying that it depends on whether it was settled or not? The Hatanya, but didn't we learn in a Breita? Rabbi Eliezer bar Yossi Omer. Rabbi Eliezer bar Yossi says from this other pasuk in Vayikra Chaf He, the other verse that we looked at before, Asher lo choma. Again, this funny spelling of it has a wall, something that has a wall. Afal pi she'ein lo achshav, this is the Gemara's explanation, or this is Rabbi Eliezer bar Yossi's explanation, even though it doesn't currently have a wall, v'haya lo mikodem. V'haya lo kodem michen. But it had one before that. Ela mai charav, rather what does charav actually mean? What does it mean that it was destroyed? Shecharav masara batlanin, that it stopped having 10 batlanin, it stopped having 10 idle people. Final question. Just a reminder, as we're talking about all of these walls, when does our Mishnah assume that cities need to be walled from in order to count as walled cities for the purposes of Megillah reading? And we saw another opinion later in the Gemara brought from a Breita about when the city had to be walled from in order to count as a walled city for the purposes of Megillah reading. Remind us what that time is also. That's it. You can stop here. The rest of the video will be discussed another day. You're welcome to turn it off now. The Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and here's another statement of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Lod ve'ono ve'geha charashim mukfor chomami mot Yeshua ben Nun havu. Lod, Ono, and Geha Charashim, these three places were walled from the time of Yeshua ben Nun. V'hani Yehoshua banani? And these were built by Yehoshua? Question mark, exclamation point. The Gemara is not so sure. V'ha Alpa'el banani. But actually Alpa'el built them. Dichtiv, as it says in a pasuk in Divrei Hayanim, I'll put this in yellow as well. Bnei Alpa'el evro misham v'shemer, hu bana et ono ve'et lod. Uvnotea. Sorry, this is the pasuk. Okay, this implies that Alpa'el is the one who built the cities. You can look this up inside. We'll discuss it later on. Uz hamech, And according to your reasoning, the Gemara says, meaning if you want to get technical about psukim and about looking at who built what, Asa bananhi. Maybe it was actually Asa who built these cities. Dichtiv, as it says, also in Divrei Hayamim, but elsewhere. Vayiven Asa et Rehab Tzirot Asher Yehuda. It was Asa who built these cities. We'll talk about these parentheses when we do this in class. This is not exactly the pasuk, but I'm going to put it in yellow anyway. This is the Gemara quoting the pasuk. Okay, so maybe it was actually Asa who built these cities. These are both people who are later than Yehoshua. We'll talk about exactly who they are. Again, you'll see that by looking up the psukim. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar says, Hani mukfor chomami mot Yeshua ben Nun havu. No, he's going to solve the problem. All of these cities were actually walled from the time of Yeshua ben Nun. Charuv b'mei Pilagesh b'Giva, and they were destroyed in the days of Pilagesh b'Giva. Ve'ata al Pa'el bananhi, and then Al Pa'el came and rebuilt them. Hazor in Pol, they were destroyed again, they fell again. Ata Asa shpatzinhu, and Asa came and fixed them up. He, Rashi says, strengthened their foundations. Dekanami dichtiv, and you can also see this can also be proved from another pasuk. A pasuk that refers to building these cities. He said to Yehuda, let's build these cities. Michlal da'arim havu mi'ikara. Shema minah. The Gemara explaining this verse says, since they were cities originally, meaning the reason it says, he said to Yehuda, let's build these cities, is because they were already considered cities. They were just rebuilding them. Shema minah, yes, learn from here, meaning this is in fact what we learn from here. We're going to stop here, and we'll pick up with the rest of the Gemara in the next video.